You think they're the problem. That boss who undermines you, that partner who criticizes everything you do, that family member who drains your energy with their constant negativity. You've convinced yourself that if you could just get away from these toxic people, your life would transform overnight. But here's the brutal truth that Joseph Murphy discovered through decades of studying the human mind. The toxic people in your life aren't your problem. They're your mirror. Every single person who triggers you, who makes your blood boil, who leaves you feeling depleted and angry, they're reflecting back something that's already churning inside you. Murphy understood what most people refuse to face. We don't attract random experiences. We attract exactly what matches our inner state. That difficult person isn't randomly appearing in your life to torture you. They're being drawn to you like a magnet because something within your own consciousness is broadcasting on their frequency. Think about this carefully. Why do some people seem to glide through life untouched by drama, while others constantly find themselves surrounded by conflict? Why do certain individuals never seem to encounter the toxic personalities that plague your existence? It's not luck. It's not that they're living in some magical bubble. It's because their inner state isn't broadcasting the signal that attracts toxicity. When you're frustrated inside, when you're carrying suppressed rage, when you're bottled up with unfulfilled dreams and bitter disappointments, you become a lightning rod for other people's dysfunction. Your internal chaos calls out to their internal chaos, and suddenly you're trapped in an endless cycle of toxic encounters. You think you're the victim, but Murphy would tell you that you're actually the unconscious architect of your own suffering. The man who hates his job will find fault with every colleague. The woman who resents her circumstances will attract partners who mirror that resentment back to her. The person who's at war with themselves will find enemies everywhere they look. This isn't mystical nonsense. It's the fundamental law of mental causation that governs every human interaction. But here's what most people can't stomach. Taking responsibility for this means admitting that every toxic encounter you've experienced has been, on some level, self-created. It means acknowledging that the problem isn't out there, in the world of difficult people. The problem is in here, in the chaotic battlefield of your own mind. And that realization is either the beginning of your freedom or the moment you choose to remain a victim forever. Murphy observed that millions of people spend their entire lives running from one toxic situation to another, never realizing they're carrying the source of their problems within themselves. They change jobs, change relationships, change cities, but the pattern follows them everywhere because the pattern lives in their consciousness, not in their circumstances. Every time you point your finger at a toxic person, 3 fingers are pointing back at you. This isn't just a cute saying. It's the fundamental truth about human psychology that Joseph Murphy spent his life trying to wake people up to. When you blame others for your emotional state, when you give them the power to control how you feel, you're voluntarily handing over the keys to your own mind. Look at how you talk about the difficult people in your life. She makes me so angry. He ruins my day. They stress me out. Do you hear the powerlessness in those statements? You're literally programming yourself to be a victim. You're telling your subconscious mind that your emotional well-being depends on the behavior of others. And your subconscious, being the faithful servant that it is, will create experiences that prove this belief true. Murphy discovered that the people who remain unaffected by toxic personalities have learned one crucial secret. They understand that no one can disturb you without your mental consent. That difficult coworker can't actually make you angry. Your critical relative can't force you to feel inadequate. These are choices you make, moment by moment, in the privacy of your own consciousness. But most people have never been taught this. They've been conditioned to believe that emotions are automatic responses to external stimuli. Someone does something, and you automatically react. Someone says something, and you have no choice but to feel hurt or offended. This is the thinking of a psychological slave. Murphy called it the greatest lie ever told to humanity. The truth is that between every stimulus and response, there's a gap. In that gap lives your freedom. In that gap lives your power. In that gap, you can choose to bless or curse, to respond with wisdom or react with unconscious programming. But most people never learn to recognize this gap, much less use it consciously. When when you truly understand that your emotional state is your responsibility and yours alone, something revolutionary happens. Toxic people lose their power over you not because they change, but because you stop giving them power. You stop being a puppet dancing to their emotional manipulation. You stop being a victim of their dysfunction. You become sovereign in your own mind. This doesn't mean you become passive or allow people to walk all over you. It means you respond from a place of conscious choice rather than unconscious reaction. It means you can set boundaries without hatred, say no without guilt, and protect yourself without becoming bitter. You can deal with difficult people from a position of strength rather than weakness. Murphy observed that most people resist this truth because it requires taking responsibility for their inner life. It's so much easier to blame others, to point fingers, to make your problems someone else's fault. But this blame game is a prison. As long as you're waiting for other people to change before you can be happy, you'll never be free. As long as you're giving others the power to determine your emotional state, you'll remain at the mercy of every toxic personality you encounter. The person who has truly learned this lesson becomes untouchable, not because they're cold or unfeeling, but because they've claimed their rightful power as the director of their own inner experience. Here's what Joseph Murphy understood that will revolutionize how you deal with difficult people. Every human being, no matter how toxic, twisted, or seemingly irredeemable, carries within them the same divine essence that beats your heart and breathes your lungs. When you learn to salute this divinity in others, even your worst enemies lose their power to disturb you. This isn't some naive, New Age fantasy about everyone being wonderful. Murphy was brutally realistic about human nature. He knew that people could be cruel, selfish, and destructive. But he also knew something that most people never discover. When you consistently recognize the divine presence in another person, you activate a force that can transform even the most toxic interaction. Think about what really happens when someone treats you badly. You immediately focus on their behavior, their words, their attitude. You make them entirely human in your mind, flawed, limited, and separate from you. But Murphy taught that this perspective is exactly what keeps you trapped in toxic dynamics. When you see only the personality, the ego, the surface drama, you engage with toxicity on its own level. But there's another way to see. Beyond the personality, beyond the dysfunction, beyond the toxic behavior, there exists in every person an indestructible core of divine intelligence. This isn't something you have to believe in religiously. It's the simple recognition that the same life force that animates you also animates them. The same consciousness that gives you the capacity for love and wisdom exists within them, even if it's buried under layers of pain and conditioning. When you consistently practice seeing this deeper reality in difficult people, something extraordinary happens. Your energy changes. Instead of radiating resistance, judgment, and conflict, you begin to emanate a frequency of recognition and respect. And here's the crucial part. People respond to your energy far more than your words. They feel how you see them before you even speak. Murphy shared countless stories of people who transformed their most difficult relationships simply by changing how they perceived the other person. The waiter who killed a miserly millionaire with kindness by consistently affirming, "God loves him and cares for him. I see God in him and he sees God in me." The result? The man who never tipped anyone gave him $500 and arranged for his promotion. This isn't magic, it's the science of consciousness. When you consistently hold someone in a higher light than they're holding themselves, you create a field of possibility that they can either accept or reject. But something in them recognizes the recognition. Something in them responds to being seen as more than their dysfunction. Does this mean you become a doormat? Absolutely not. You can set firm boundaries while still honoring the divine in someone. You can say no while still blessing them. You can protect yourself while still seeing their highest potential. The difference is that you're responding from strength rather than weakness, from wholeness rather than fragmentation. The toxic person is typically someone who has forgotten their own divine nature. They're acting from their wounds, their fears, their sense of separation and inadequacy. When you meet their toxicity with recognition of their deeper truth, you're not enabling their behavior, You're offering them a mirror of who they could be instead of reflecting back their dysfunction. Joseph Murphy understood something that most people never consider. Toxic people are emotional cripples. Just as you wouldn't mock someone with a physical disability, you shouldn't react with hatred towards someone with a psychological deformity. This perspective doesn't excuse their behavior, but it frees you from taking their dysfunction personally. Think about how you respond when you see someone with an obvious physical limitation. You feel compassion, not anger. You understand that their condition isn't a reflection of their character or a personal attack on you. You see their struggle and wish them well. But when someone has an emotional disability, when they're psychologically twisted, chronically negative, or interpersonally toxic, you take it as a personal assault on your well-being. Murphy taught that this double standard keeps you trapped in unnecessary suffering. The person who constantly criticizes others is suffering from an internal wound that never healed. The individual who manipulates and controls is operating from a deep sense of powerlessness and fear. The personality who drains energy from everyone around them is running on empty inside themselves. This doesn't mean you should tolerate abuse or allow people to mistreat you. It means you can respond to their toxicity the way a doctor responds to a patient's symptoms, with professional detachment and appropriate treatment, not with personal offense and emotional reactivity. When you understand that their behavior is a symptom of their psychological condition rather than a character flaw designed to hurt you, everything changes. The toxic person is in pain. They may not acknowledge it, they may not even be conscious of it, but their destructive behavior is always a cry for help from someone who never learned healthy ways to meet their emotional needs. The bully was once bullied. The manipulator was once powerless. The energy vampire was once ignored and abandoned. This understanding creates what Murphy called divine immunity. When you see toxic behavior as a manifestation of psychological illness rather than malicious intent, you stop taking it personally. You develop the same kind of emotional protection that healthcare workers develop when dealing with confused or aggressive patients. You don't hate the person with dementia who lashes out at you. You understand that the disease is speaking, not the person. But here's where most people get confused. They think compassion means becoming a doormat. They believe that understanding someone's pain means accepting their poor treatment. Murphy taught exactly the opposite. True compassion often requires firm boundaries. Just as you wouldn't let a physically disabled person harm themselves or others, you don't enable a psychologically disabled person to continue their destructive patterns. The difference is in your internal state. You can set boundaries without hatred. You can protect yourself without seeking revenge. You can refuse to engage with toxicity without becoming toxic yourself. You respond to their dysfunction with the same firmness you'd use to restrain someone having a psychotic episode, not with anger, but with clear, decisive action. When you consistently practice seeing toxic people as emotionally handicapped rather than inherently evil, you build an unshakable foundation of inner peace. Their attacks bounce off you because you understand they're not really attacking you. They're thrashing around in their own psychological prison, and you just happen to be nearby when their pain exploded outward. This perspective transforms you from a victim into a witness, from someone who takes everything personally into someone who can observe human suffering with detached compassion. Joseph Murphy discovered that the subconscious mind is like a faithful computer that executes whatever program you consistently feed it. When you're constantly thinking about how toxic people upset you, you're programming your subconscious to create more upset experiences. But when you systematically reprogram your inner computer with the right mental software, you become invulnerable to external toxicity. Most people approach difficult relationships with the same mental programming that created the problem in the first place. They think the same thoughts, feel the same emotions, and react with the same patterns that attracted the toxicity initially. Then they wonder why nothing changes. Murphy taught that if you want different results, you must change your mental software. The young law student Murphy worked with had failing grades and conflicts with teachers until he learned to program his subconscious with precise instructions. The infinite intelligence in my subconscious mind reveals to me everything I need to know. I radiate love and goodwill to my teachers, and I am at peace with them. I pass all examinations in divine order. Notice the structure of this programming. It doesn't fight against the problem. It installs new operating instructions. It doesn't resist the teacher's difficult behavior. It programs a new response pattern. It doesn't try to change external circumstances. It changes the internal programming that creates those circumstances. This is the secret that transforms your relationship with toxic people. You stop trying to change them and start changing your subconscious programming about them. Instead of rehearsing their faults in your mind, you begin rehearsing your desired experience. Instead of building case files against them in your thoughts, you start installing new response patterns. Here's how the reprogramming works. Every night before sleep and every morning upon waking, when your subconscious is most receptive, you feed it precise instructions about how you want to experience difficult people. You don't deny their behavior, but you program yourself to respond from strength rather than weakness, from peace rather than reactivity. The process isn't about positive thinking or denial. It's about installing new software that automatically runs when you encounter toxicity. Just like learning to drive a car, you repeat the new pattern until it becomes second nature. Eventually, your peaceful response to difficult people becomes as automatic as breathing. But here's the crucial part most people miss. You must be consistent and systematic. You can't program your subconscious sporadically and expect results. Just as you wouldn't expect a computer to run new software after installing it only once, you can't expect your mind to operate differently without consistent programming. Murphy observed that most people spend more time programming their subconscious with negative expectations than positive ones. They rehearse worst-case scenarios, replay past conflicts, and mentally prepare for future battles. Then they wonder why they keep attracting toxic experiences. The reprogramming process reverses this pattern. Instead of mentally rehearsing why someone will upset you, you mentally rehearse remaining centered and peaceful in their presence. Instead of programming yourself to expect conflict, you program yourself to radiate harmony. Instead of preparing for emotional warfare, you prepare for divine immunity. When you consistently follow this practice, something remarkable happens. Your external world begins to mirror your internal programming. People who used to trigger you lose their power. Situations that once upset you become opportunities to demonstrate your inner strength. The toxic people in your life either transform in response to your new energy or naturally fade from your experience. This isn't magic. It's the science of consciousness that Murphy spent decades perfecting. Change your internal programming, and your external experience must change to match it. Joseph Murphy uncovered the most revolutionary truth about human relationships. The people in your life are not accidents. They are precise reflections of your inner mental and emotional state. This isn't mystical speculation. It's the fundamental law of mental correspondence that governs every human interaction you've ever experienced. The businessman who attracted harmonious customers by changing his mental attitude toward delinquent debtors proved this law in action. When he shifted from anger and frustration to blessing and prosperity consciousness, 8 out of 10 people who owed him money suddenly paid their bills with apologies. The external world changed because his internal world changed first. This law explains why some people seem to be magnets for toxic personalities, while others rarely encounter them. It's not random chance or bad luck. The person who consistently radiates inner turmoil will consistently attract people who mirror that turmoil back to them. The individual who maintains inner peace will find themselves surrounded by more peaceful interactions. But here's what most people resist about this truth. It means you're responsible for the quality of people in your life. Not responsible for their behavior, that's their choice, but responsible for the frequency you're broadcasting that attracts certain types of people to you. If you're constantly encountering toxic personalities, you need to examine what signal you're sending out. Think about your current inner state honestly. Are you carrying suppressed anger? Do you have unresolved resentments? Are you frustrated with your life circumstances? Are you critical and judgmental of others? These internal states broadcast like radio signals, attracting people who operate on similar frequencies. The maladjusted person always attracts other maladjusted people. The harmonious individual consistently draws harmonious relationships. This isn't because good people deserve better treatment. It's because they're broadcasting a different signal entirely. Their inner peace creates an energetic field that repels toxicity and attracts harmony. Murphy observed that when you change your inner broadcasting station, your external experience must change to match. This isn't wishful thinking, it's the mechanical operation of mental law. Your consciousness creates your circumstances, not the other way around. Your inner world determines your outer world with mathematical precision. The practical application of this law is life-changing. Instead of trying to change the toxic people around you, you focus on changing your inner state. Instead of fighting against difficult personalities, you transform the consciousness that attracted them. Instead of being a victim of other people's dysfunction, you become the conscious creator of your relational experience. This requires brutal self-honesty. You must be willing to examine your own mental and emotional patterns without making excuses. You must face the uncomfortable truth that your difficult relationships are showing you something about your own consciousness that needs healing or transformation. But here's the liberating part. Once you understand this law, you realize you have complete power over your relational experience. You don't need other people to change for your life to improve. You don't need to find better people or move to a nicer environment. You simply need to change your inner broadcasting station. When your consciousness is truly peaceful, loving, and harmonious, you become like a lighthouse in a storm. Ships in distress may approach your shores, but they're seeking your light, not trying to destroy it. Troubled people may enter your sphere, but they're drawn to your stability, not your chaos. The difference is that you're no longer feeding their dysfunction with your own. You're offering them a different possibility. This is why Murphy taught that the outer journey is always a reflection of the inner journey. Change yourself, and you change how you experience everything else. Transform your consciousness, and your circumstances must transform to match. Joseph Murphy discovered that certain words and phrases carry healing power that can rebuild your psychological immune system against toxicity. Just as the Australian doctor used the 23rd and 91st Psalms to heal his cardiac attacks and stroke, you can use spiritual medicine to create unshakable inner peace that no toxic person can penetrate. The doctor who nearly died from his own rage and hatred found salvation not in pills or procedures, but in ancient words that have protected people for thousands of years. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He leadeth me beside the still waters, he restoreth my soul. These aren't just pretty religious phrases, they're precise psychological medicine that restructures your consciousness. When you consistently absorb these time-tested truths, you're not just reading words, you're downloading the accumulated healing experiences of countless souls who use these same spiritual formulas in their darkest hours. You're tapping into what Murphy called the universal subjective mind, the collective wisdom of humanity's survival techniques encoded in sacred literature. Think about what happens when you're under psychological attack from a toxic person. Your mind becomes chaotic, your emotions turbulent, your peace shattered. But when you've saturated your consciousness with spiritual truth, you have an automatic defense system that activates under pressure. Instead of reactive chaos, you access transcendent calm. I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. These words create what Murphy called divine immunity, not because they're magical, but because they reprogram your subconscious mind with unshakable truth about your spiritual nature. They remind you that you're more than your circumstances, stronger than your challenges, protected by forces greater than any human toxicity. The power isn't in believing these words religiously, it's in using them psychologically. Whether you call it God, the universe, or your higher self doesn't matter. What matters is that you consistently feed your subconscious mind with truths that create inner stability rather than messages that create inner chaos. Most people fill their minds with toxic mental food, negative news, gossip, complaints, and rehearsals of past hurts. Then they wonder why they feel psychologically weak and vulnerable to other people's dysfunction. Murphy taught that your mind is like your body. It becomes strong or weak based on what you consistently feed it. When you make spiritual truth your daily mental diet, you build psychological muscles that toxic people cannot break. You develop emotional antibodies that neutralize their poison before it can affect you. You create an inner fortress of peace that remains unshakable regardless of external storms. Goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, because I dwell in the house of God forever. This isn't wishful thinking, it's powerful programming that instructs your subconscious to expect and attract positive experiences. When your deep mind is convinced of your spiritual protection, it creates circumstances that prove this truth. The doctor who recovered from his rage-induced illness didn't just heal his heart, he transformed his entire life experience. He learned to see difficult people as imperfect beings striving toward perfection rather than enemies to be defeated. His inner transformation changed everything about how others responded to him. This is the practical power of spiritual medicine. It doesn't just make you feel better temporarily. It rebuilds your entire psychological foundation so that toxic people lose their power to disturb your essential peace. Joseph Murphy taught the most counterintuitive truth about dealing with difficult people. The moment you surrender them to the infinite, they lose their power to disturb you. Not because they change, but because you stop trying to control what was never yours to control in the first place. This surrender isn't defeat, it's the ultimate victory over toxicity. The man who came to Murphy filled with rage and frustration about his employees and associates had spent years trying to fix everyone around him. He criticized, complained, and fought against their difficult personalities. But the harder he fought, the more toxic his relationships became. He was trapped in a war he could never win because he was fighting the wrong battle. Murphy gave him a revolutionary prescription. Instead of fighting against toxic people, surrender them to the infinite intelligence that governs all life. I surrender them to the infinite, and this infinite presence and power takes them out of my life in divine law and divine order through divine love. And the same presence and power takes me out of their life in divine law and divine order through divine love. This isn't passive resignation, it's active spiritual technology. When you surrender someone to the infinite, you're acknowledging that their behavior is between them and the universe, not between them and you. You're removing yourself from the impossible position of trying to be their personal salvation army or their judge and jury. Most people resist this because they're addicted to the illusion of control. They believe that their anger, frustration, and resistance somehow influences the toxic person's behavior. They think their emotional investment in someone else's dysfunction somehow motivates that person to change. But Murphy discovered the opposite is true. Your emotional involvement in their toxicity actually feeds it. When you surrender a toxic person to the infinite, something miraculous happens. You stop broadcasting the frequency that attracted their dysfunction in the first place. You stop playing the victim role in their unconscious drama. You withdraw your energy from their toxic patterns, and suddenly they have no one to perform for. Think about what really happens in toxic relationships. Both people are unconsciously playing roles that feed each other's dysfunction. The manipulator needs someone to manipulate. The energy vampire needs someone to drain. The critical person needs someone to criticize. When you surrender them to the infinite, you step out of their unconscious play entirely. This doesn't mean you become cold or uncaring. It means you love them enough to stop enabling their toxic patterns. You care about them enough to refuse to participate in their self-destruction. You honor them enough to let the universe handle their growth instead of trying to be their personal transformation coach. The practical application is simple but profound. Every time you feel triggered by someone's toxic behavior, instead of engaging with it mentally or emotionally, you immediately surrender them to the infinite wisdom that created them. You mentally declare your freedom from their psychological drama and allow divine intelligence to handle whatever needs to happen. What happens next often feels miraculous, but is actually the natural operation of spiritual law. Either the toxic person begins to transform in response to your withdrawal of energy from their patterns, or they naturally fade from your experience. The universe arranges circumstances so that you're no longer forced to interact with their dysfunction. Murphy observed that people who consistently practice this surrender find themselves in green pastures and still waters, surrounded by harmony instead of chaos, peace instead of conflict. They don't become isolated or lonely. They attract healthier, more conscious people who match their transformed consciousness. The key is understanding that you're not surrendering them with anger or resentment, but with love and wisdom. You're recognizing that their growth is between them and the infinite, just as your growth is between you and the infinite. This surrender sets both of you free to evolve without being trapped in toxic patterns together. Joseph Murphy's ultimate teaching about toxic people leads to a profound realization. When you've truly mastered your inner world, you become untouchable. Not because you build walls or become cold, but because you've developed such complete sovereignty over your own consciousness that no external force can disturb your essential peace. The Japanese businessman who had traveled extensively for 50 years understood this mastery. He had learned that people are the result of their conditioning, their training, their habitual thinking patterns. Instead of fighting against their differences or taking their behavior personally, he simply blessed them and moved on. This wasn't indifference, it was enlightened detachment. Think about what it means to be truly free from toxic people's influence. It doesn't mean avoiding them or building elaborate defense systems. It means developing such complete mastery over your own mind that their dysfunction simply cannot penetrate your consciousness. You see their behavior clearly, you respond appropriately, but you remain internally undisturbed. This level of mastery requires understanding that you cannot change other people, but you have absolute power over your own inner experience. You cannot control their words or actions, but you can control whether those words and actions disturb your peace. You cannot force them to be different, but you can choose to see them through the eyes of wisdom rather than reaction. The master of consciousness operates from a place Murphy called divine imperturbability. They've developed such profound inner stability that external chaos cannot shake their fundamental serenity. They can engage with difficult people when necessary, set boundaries when required, and protect themselves when threatened, all without losing their inner equilibrium. This mastery isn't achieved overnight. It's the result of consistent practice, daily application of spiritual principles, and unwavering commitment to your own psychological sovereignty. You must be willing to take complete responsibility for your inner state regardless of external circumstances. You must choose your responses consciously rather than reacting unconsciously. But here's what makes this mastery so powerful. When you've truly achieved it, toxic people sense something different about you. They feel your unshakability, your complete self-possession, your refusal to play their unconscious games. Some will be intrigued and drawn to transform in your presence. Others will be uncomfortable and naturally distance themselves from your stability. The person who has mastered their relationship with toxic people doesn't need to advertise their strength or prove their immunity. They simply radiate a quality of presence that speaks louder than words. They've become like a mountain, unmoved by storms, unchanged by the weather, solid in their own being regardless of external conditions. This doesn't make you superior to others or lacking in compassion. Instead, it makes you deeply useful. You become someone others can count on for stability in chaos, wisdom in confusion, peace in conflict. You serve as a lighthouse for those still lost in the storms of reactive consciousness. Murphy taught that this level of mastery is available to anyone willing to do the inner work. It requires facing your own shadow, healing your own wounds, and taking complete responsibility for your own consciousness. It demands that you stop blaming others for your emotional state and start claiming your power as the director of your own inner experience. When you reach this state, something remarkable happens. You realize that toxic people were actually your greatest teachers. They forced you to develop strengths you never knew you possessed. They challenged you to find peace in impossible circumstances. They taught you that your happiness cannot depend on other people's behavior. In a strange way, they freed you to become who you truly are. The final liberation isn't freedom from toxic people. It's freedom from being toxically affected by anyone or anything outside yourself.